sets the high-level goals of where we want to be as a business, and it's up to us to make the stories and the product decisions to get us where we want to go. We also have the development part, which is the bit we all know and love, the writing the code, the deploying all the artifacts to production, all of that fun stuff. And we're also responsible for the operational support for all the software that we write. So we see a bit of functionality all the way from the inception of the story idea all the way to it delivering value in production. And that's pretty much how all of our teams work at Unruly. There's also a paper that we've submitted and presented at XP 2015, the URL's there, which goes into a lot more detail about our experiences with mob programming, in particular, the problem we adopted it to solve, how our experiences of it, and how we've adapted it to suit Unruly's culture. But this is not the sort of detail we're going to be going into today. So if you've heard either Benji or myself talk about mob programming and how we do it at Unruly before, it does pretty much take the form that I just described, so why we did it, how we did it, and what the results were. But we're going to take a bit of a different tack today, and we're going to talk about it through the lens of this book behind me, which is Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Has anyone read this book? Okay, not many. So this is a book outlining it's not just for software teams, it's for any generic team, that there are, according to the book, 5 core dysfunctions that any team might suffer from. And we're going to look at how, by adopting mob programming at Unruly, how it's improved some of these dysfunctions, or it's highlighted things that we didn't actually think were problems but actually are. So this is going to be the venue for which we're going to talk about mob programming today. In particular, as Woody said in the talk prior to ours, it's very much about turning up the good, but in our experiences, it turns up both the good and the bad, which is really useful for us because when you're turning up the bad, it becomes way more noticeable, and as long as you're reflecting constantly and retrospecting constantly, then it gives you a venue with which to fix it.
So before we get into the dysfunctions stuff, just a quick recap on mob programming for those who weren't in Woody's talk. So for us, mob programming is having a whole team, possibly the whole of our team, working on the same problem at the same time using the same workstation. And we'll show you some of our setup. We were inspired to try mob programming after attending one of Woody's talks, very similar to the one you just saw. You may recognize that picture. So we were at Java 1 just about a year ago now, and we saw Woody talk about mob programming. He chatted to our team about it. Everyone was quite excited to give it a go. We were already pairing on it all of our production code anyway, and we gave it a go, and it's kind of gone from there. We first started with the idea of Mob Fridays, where every Friday, whatever was the next task on our board, we'd pick it up and work on it all together as a team. It was a nice thing to do on a Friday. And everyone really liked the idea of mobbing, and it worked quite well. As we did it a bit more, we found it works quite well for some things, less well for us for other things, and it's become a bit more dynamic, as Woody alluded to. We're doing a bit more what we call flash mobs now, where when we're picking something up, we'll think about what's a suitable number of people to work on it, and that number of people will work on it. If it becomes apparent that having that many people isn't working, it may disband, it may reform again later. Someone might spin out of the mob to go and look at something on their own and then come back. So it's become quite a lot more dynamic over time. This is what our mobbing setup looks like. It will show you a few photos today. We sit around in a kind of semicircle around our workstation. We're just doing it in our normal dev area where we were working before. Some companies have used meeting rooms, but we haven't needed to do that. We have, you can't see there, but the driver has a keyboard, mouse, and their own big monitor, which is perpendicular to the big screen that everyone else is using. For that, we got like a 50-inch TV, so we found that works quite well. Yeah, this is how it went. We did find, when we first started particularly, that we were less good at kind of involving the whole team in the process. When pair programming, we got quite used to kind of natural rhythms of pairing, so we'd swap navigator driver quite regularly. That wasn't working quite as well with mobbing, particularly when we were new to it, so we started using a timer to remind ourselves to move on. One of our colleagues has written a little web-based tool that helps with this. You can put in the names of the people in your team, and it'll tell you whose turn it is next. So we tend to have a kind of more strict rotate round who's driving, because it's helped us to keep the whole team engaged, although the more experienced teams at mobbing have needed to do this less. One of the interesting things was how viral it was. So we heard from Woody about it, we talked to our team about it, we started doing it, and immediately all the other dev teams were quite interested in what we were doing. They were coming and watching while we were mobbing. And it was less than a week, I think, before the other teams started stealing our big TV to do it themselves, give it a go. And then a week or two later, they'd all bought their own. That was interesting. We've even found it's gone outside the development team. Our marketing team has tried doing collaborative working around things like press releases. So I don't think mob programming has to be limited to programming. It works well for lots of things.
So briefly, Lencioni describes the 5 dysfunctions of a team in a pyramid form, which we tried to do something like this and failed at because of text alignment. So the base of the pyramid is at the bottom and the top one is at the top. So the very biggest level at the bottom of the pyramid is, the first dysfunction of a team is an absence of trust between the team members, because without trusting your team members, you largely can't do anything. Secondly, you have the fear of conflicts, not conflict altogether, but lack of meaningful conflict. So this is things like brokering discussions and arguing for the correct course of action if need be. A lack of commitment to the agreed team goals. So once you're all aligned down the same road, it's, well, actually, I didn't agree with this. This wasn't my idea. A lack of commitment in that measure, which leads us on to the avoidance of accountability. So if you're not committed, it's very easy to say, oh, if that's gone wrong, I didn't agree with that. That wasn't my fault, which brings quite a bit of disharmony to the team. But if you've built those 4 layers, then it's still possible for your team to be, as Woody mentioned, quite ego-driven and lack of focus on the goals and results of the team. So these are the things we're going to be talking about, and we're going to start from the bottom of the pyramid and work our way up, and things that Unruly discovered about itself along the way. So absence of trust is the first one. It's arguably critical. I don't think anyone would say that having a team that doesn't trust each other is going to make the team better than a team that trusts each other. And a good way of brokering trust is working closely. So people who pair quite a lot with each other are more likely to trust each other, not just together as colleagues, but with the decisions, so they can step back from a pair and know that someone else will carry on the work in the correct way. And mobbing just takes this and it dials it up to the next level, which is we're all working together at the same time. And so there's always this air of like camaraderie, and we're all working together on the same thing. And it's really good at making us feel like a team and brokering trust. And there's none of that, it's his fault or her fault or anything like that. So the pattern that Benji describes, so we have, much as Woody said, we have a single driver at the keyboard and we have everyone else being navigators. And the way we try to operate is that the driver is not allowed to put anything of their own design into it. They're just almost the dumb hands of the team. And it takes a fair bit of effort to get into the mindset of being okay with this and not trying to push your own agenda, because it's almost like, I've included this picture of the classic trust fall exercise here. So you have to trust the team behind you to guide the code in the correct decision, drive the code in the correct way. Woody mentioned the strong pairing in his talk prior to ours, which is, I have an idea, here have the keyboard so I can explain my idea to you. And mob programming just takes that and drives it up to the next level. We're also making decisions collectively as a team. So when we're on the same page and we're all engaged together, that's another really good way of brokering trust. But too much trust can lead to overconfidence, like overconfidence in our slide skills. So to go back to the trust fall exercise, if you're all so confident in your team, you're all falling back and no one's there to catch each other, and that's what sometimes can happen. So you become almost a bit reckless. So you're making decisions like, I may not know what will happen if I do this, but I'm pretty sure someone else on the team will know. And if everyone starts thinking in that way, then it can lead you down to some pretty dodgy roads. But we were reflecting on this. This did crop up once. We made a decision, and we actually regretted it because we would just think, oh no, we'll be able to sort it out, but we weren't. We weren't able to sort it out, and it was quite a risky decision to make. Second one, so you're at the point where everyone on the team trusts each other now, but they're still almost trusting each other a bit too much. So you want to preserve the harmony within the team rather than have the perceived damaging conflict, when conflict is actually quite healthy and useful. So we prefer, so Woody touched on the what's the ideal number for a mob. And it really does depend, but we do have a couple of things that we like to keep in mind when we're choosing the size of a mob. So we like to keep it small, but it's not the number of people in the mob that's important, it's the how long does a person have to wait before they get back to the keyboard, because then they feel engaged. And we found that the sweet spot for that is around 20 to 30 minutes. So if you have a team of 3, you can have you can be sat in the driving seat for up to 10 minutes, and that's normally fine. But if your team is like 6, 7, then it's much cleaner to normally drop it to about 5, because it preserves that feeling of rapidity. We also prefer odd numbers, because then, unlike with pairing, if you have 2 people with particularly strong opinions opposing each other and you can reach a deadlock, there is always going to be some form of quorum to have the team decision going in the right direction. And if it gets to the point where the number of possible paths is the number of people on your team, you should probably have a design discussion at that point and not be writing code. It's also important to preserve the balanced view. So without conflict and without arguing down, it's possible for, especially in pairs, to take off code in a direction that the team as a whole would not want. So, for example, a pair who tend to specialize more of it on the infrastructure side would be thinking more about, let's take this code down an infrastructure safe route, rather than someone who may be more focused on the user-facing part. And because everyone is cooperating in the mob, we have this balance of views and specialities, and everyone can contribute. And we try and dial this up as well. So because of the way we work at Unruly, where everyone is T-shaped and a generalist with specialization, we do also have specialists who their goal is to come and help us rather than to do the work themselves. So if we have a piece of work with a user experience component, we'll bring in Mike, who's our user experience specialist, and he will come in and he will mob with us and he will pair with us, again, to where the team is thinking in a very technical sense to argue against us and bring us down the correct route. Some forms of conflict aren't really helpful, so, but this very much depends on the trust aspect and listening to the members of your team. So this is from a Mitchell and Webb sketch about extreme negative feedback. Some people really like really low-level granular feedback, and this is things like, you're not using a keyboard shortcut, why aren't you using a keyboard shortcut, why aren't you using a keyboard shortcut, or typos in your code. Some people are just unable to proceed or concentrate if they can see a typo in the code. But it's very important to feed back to the team if you prefer this low-level granular conflict, or if you just think, actually no, we can sort out typos and everything later. And you also run into a problem wherein the quiet and loud is not necessarily vocal. Loud can be dominating personalities that may have a bit, whether it's experience in the domain or tenure at the company, who people are subconsciously or consciously deferring to in decisions. So that can be a problem. And also that of groupthink. So again, Woody touched on this, where people are so concerned with preserving the harmony in the team that they won't bring up, or they literally won't bring up conflict at all, and it's very easy to go off, again, down the wrong route. So it's good to have conflict within the team. Again, another way of tackling this, but taking it to the next extreme, is that there are still things within the company that are within the company mindset. So we sometimes bring in external people from outside the company to take part in our mobs. So on the left here is Tom, who recently joined us for a week to take part in our mobs, who has no idea of how we do things, and so is constantly questioning things and bringing out, why are we doing this, why are we doing this? Which is good for highlighting things that we have come to accept but aren't necessarily what we would call good practice.
Yeah, so it's highlighted some things that we thought we were good at that we were less good at, and through constant reflection, it's helped us tackle some of the things that maybe we thought we were good at until we started mobbing. Next dysfunction we want to talk about is a lack of commitment to kind of communal goals. If the team doesn't buy into the decisions that are being made, then you're going to find it hard to make progress. So as Alex touched on, because we're all working together all the time, we're all making decisions together all the time. So if we get to a decision point, then we'll discuss it at that point. We haven't got to either go and round everyone up or make a decision on our own. It means that you can rely on you understand everyone else's viewpoint in the discussion, and you're confident that your opinions, you've had a chance to express your opinions. So even if the team ends up going in a different direction to what you'd like, at least you understand the reasons for that, and you can all agree as a team and move on in that direction. So we found it helpful for that, whereas with pairing, maybe there's a certain amount of resentment that, okay, that pair made that decision, but I think if I'd been involved, then we'd have done something differently. So that's helped. There was also a slight problem that we had with pairing sometimes, where because we liked to encourage regular rotation of pairs in order to spread knowledge around, so maybe once a day or even more frequently, someone would swap out of a pair and someone else swap in, so more people got to see that feature. That helped to spread the knowledge of how that feature worked around the team. But it sometimes meant that continuity on the design, where the team wanted to go with the feature, was lost, and it kind of meandered a bit or ended up at a less ideal design that the team ended up not being perfectly happy with. But when we're mobbing, there's more of us providing continuity on the design all the way through to completion. And so it's actually easier to swap out if you have to go off and do something else, because you know that there's more than one person providing that continuity for you. Next dysfunction is no accountability, avoiding accountability. This often happens in teams where you might want to blame someone else for a decision that was made, or you finish a bit of work and throw it over the fence to someone else, and then it's not my problem anymore. But blame is not really possible in a mob programming environment. I think we thought we were quite good at avoiding a blame culture, but through mobbing, we realized that we could have been better because we became better through mobbing. When we're all working together, you can't blame someone else for a decision that was made, because you made that decision together. If something goes wrong in production, that's something that all of you worked on. It's all of your fault, which is how we like to view things before, but it's just how things are when you're mobbing. There's no scope for blaming anyone else. And similarly, there's no opportunity to throw things over the fence to someone else. As we said at the start, we're product development and ops all together in one team. We work on something from conception through to keeping it running. And anything that's needed to achieve that goal, the team works on together. So you don't have the bit where I'll finish the coding, I'm going to throw that over to some QA people to look at, or I'm going to throw that over to a UX person to design a UI for it. Rather, the team works on the feature all the way through, and if we need other specialities, we'll pull them into our mob as and when they're needed. Another aspect of accountability is kind of working agreements. So we have retrospectives. We often come up with working agreements where, let's say, next time we're going to touch a particular part of the code base, we're agreeing that we're going to clean it up. Or we've noticed that we're slipping and not releasing software as fast as we'd like. So we want to remind ourselves to do that. Well, mob programming means that there's more people to remind yourself to do that. So we do notice that different people pipe up and say, that's the point where we could be committing and deploying what we've done rather than moving on to the next thing. There's more people to remember that when you're working together. There'll be people in the team who have a pet hate of part of the system, And if they were working in a pair on it, then they're likely to clean it up. But if other people in the team are working on it, they might just leave it as it is. But when you're working together, you all make those decisions together, and you all remind yourselves of how you've agreed to work. Many teams try and do accountability to some extent through stand-ups, where you all kind of synchronize the team together, and you all have to listen to what everyone did yesterday. And it's often not terribly interesting. There may not be the most useful things to know about what they did yesterday, but people sometimes feel a pressure to say what they did yesterday just so they can justify spending a whole day doing it. But again, there's no need to do any of that. I think Woody touched on this, but you're working together all the time. You know what everyone was doing yesterday. There's no need to synchronize together.